Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and our last presenter, Ms. Gillian, welcome.
Good morning. Is it still morning? I'm Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. We're a nonprofit civil rights law firm, and we practice our lawyering by working very closely with community groups and advocacy groups and policymakers as well. I'm privileged to represent a coalition of groups that organize parents and students, education advocacy groups, policy and civil rights legal organizations. We appreciate very much the hard work delegated to the State Board of Education and agree with their direction of creating a single system that captures what's needed for ESSA, but driven by California's priorities in LCFF. We have worked very hard to participate as informed stakeholders in the Board of Ed's processes. Having said that, we are very, very concerned that the State Board of Ed may not measure and show to the public how equity under LCFF is working. Achievement gaps must be shown in the new accountability system. Any district or school that does not improve in closing achievement gaps cannot be judged as acceptably performing. The overall performance and growth of students are important, but performance in closing gaps is critical, and it's part and parcel of accountability under the new formula. Equity must be a top-level dimension in our new accountability system. The state needs to invest in the collection of statewide data on its state priorities, including things like parent and student engagement and school climate. A lack of reliable statewide data and metrics to measure this, parent engagement and student engagement and school climate state priorities, raises very serious concerns for how the state will hold districts accountable for these priorities. There are too few indicators, and the state has added new priorities with LCFF. The state needs to fund the implementation of the new accountability system, including an adequate interface for the public and adequate support and assistance for a continuum of interventions. You've heard a little bit about the user acceptance testing. So far, the community stakeholders are not included in that. Again, we feel it's very important that community stakeholders be part of using the evaluation rubric, so we should be part of the testing. My final point, the grand bargain of LCFF was flexibility, ending categorical restrictions in exchange for transparency. We see this evidenced in two ways. At the local level, districts are not being transparent about their use of supplemental and concentration funding. They are not separately identifying these funds, and they're not justifying their use as required by the spending regulations made by the board. There is not a clear explanation locally how weighted funds are being used to increase or improve services for low-income students, English learners, and foster youth. Many in our coalition have spent lots of time reviewing and reporting about this and other issues with LCAPs. The clarity called for in the LCAP is part and parcel of what needs to be in place for any system to work, to make improvements, to change actions, to change services. You have to know what we have been spending on and what is actually taking place. The other way that we are seeing this is at the state level. Now that story is even worse. The Ledge Analyst Prop 98 analysis says in 2015-16, $32 billion out of a total of $53 billion in LCFF funding has gone for English learner and low-income students. But there is no requirement to say what is being spent specifically to increase or improve services for low-income students, English learners, and foster youth, the student groups who generate these additional funds. Again, the state, you cannot make improvements in your policy without knowing how you're spending these precious dollars. And we are not asking for a complicated minutia tracking. We just want to know supplemental and concentration. It is only one more resource code in our accounting structure. I will end my comments on that. I have colleagues here today that I know will embellish further on some of these issues, and we so appreciate the time that you're taking to learn about this, to learn how it's going. It is an exciting time. Many things are happening, but now is the time to take the closest look that you can to nip in the bud the problems that we're seeing so we can make this work. We can't not let this work. This must work. This is it. Now is our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from members? Okay, well, thank you. Now is the time for public comment. It's also noon. Are we to vacate this room? Hopefully, it'll be a reasonably short line.
You do it.
Thank you for joining us and thank you for participating. Okay, please.
Madam Chair and members, Brendan Tuig on behalf of EdVoice. Thank you, Madam Chair and members, for having this hearing. We sincerely appreciate the incisive questions and the robust discussion. And in fact, we encourage you to do more of this. I think how big of a endeavor this is requires it to make sure it's done right. We really want to make sure that there is meaningful data provided both on the fiscal side and the outcome side. When we're talking about the fiscal side, we're specifically referring to the supplemental and concentration grants to make sure that the dollars are actually getting to the students for whom they were intended. On the outcome side, we want to make sure that those students who the program is focused on and are actually improving, that student achievement is improving at the school level, that subgroup gaps are closing. So again, members, we appreciate your oversight. We'd like you to do more of it, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Karen Sweat. I'm a retired teacher, and I now run a nonprofit organization that teaches parents and community stakeholders how to read school and district budgets and expenditure reports. Tracking expenditures is not complicated or difficult. Because you did not require school districts to track and report supplemental and concentration spending, we cannot do our jobs of participating in local control. We need change for low-income students, English learners, and foster youth. Please help us participate in local control by requiring sup and cons spending to be tracked. The truth is, without identifying sup and cons spending data, there is no accountability.
Thank you.
Lydia Bourne, representing California School Nurses Organization. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning, or this afternoon. The new accountability process we're undergoing provides us with an opportunity to include the student support services that are critical in ensuring that our students are successful in schools. The state ed code, health and safety code, and numerous other codes, as well as federal laws, mandate the provision of health and human services which allow students to function in the least restrictive environment. We have 10% of our kids who are classified as special ed. Many thousands more have to have daily medication and also undergo specialized healthcare procedures every day. The schools also play a critical role in informing parents about access to health care, health coverage, as well as social services that they may be in need of. Your August 2015 document summarizing the state accountability components relative to LCFF asks what components are missing. We believe a key component that is missing is student support services. The role of these student support services must be acknowledged and given credence when we speak of the success of our students as well as the entire educational system. Unless and until we start to address these issues, many of our children will continue to struggle and equity will not be achieved. We respectively request that student health services, student support services be considered one of the critical components when you are developing the new accountability system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, I'm Brian Rivas on behalf of the Education Trust West. We really appreciate the questions from some of your members of the committee this morning, particularly Senator Block, about the question about are the taxpayers getting their money's worth. I would just ask that you consider that question from the point of view of communities of color, where parents want their kids to graduate prepared for college and a career, but they also don't want to continue to lag behind other subgroups in terms of gaps in student achievement, and they don't want to be concentrated in substandard schools. Frankly, the state board has been great about listening to us, but we still have deep concerns about the system that they're developing and the fact that it's not going to do enough to address those concerns. We're worried that we're going to end up with a very passive system that only looks at student achievement data by subgroup. And so we're trying to address that by urging them to fulfill all of their obligations under federal law and the Every Student Succeeds Act. In particular, we want to see high goals, differentiated goals for accelerated growth, for closing gaps, and we need them to differentiate schools to identify those that are most in need of supports and intervention.
Thank you.
Hi, Brian Lee on behalf of Fight Crime Invest in Kids, representing over 400 police chiefs, sheriffs, district attorneys, and crime victims. When the legislature passed LCFF, they required the rubrics to be holistic and multidimensional, and your oversight today is very much appreciated because it's really important to ensure that the accountability system lives up to that holistic, multidimensional idea. Now, the cornerstone of that, and you could kind of hear it from witnesses and from the members themselves, school climate is such an important thing there for a multidimensional system. The research is amazing from WestEd, linking it to academic achievement, from across the country, linking it to grade retention, graduation, and crime for suspension rates. CORE even twice has suspensions in there. It's so important to them, and they're research-based. At Fight Crime Invest in Kids, we have, for the last 2 years, been doing analysis of LCAPs for the 50 largest school districts, looking especially at the school climate priority, and hope to expect to have our second-year findings out soon. 2 things for you to keep an eye on as you're monitoring this is, 1, inclusion of something about school climate as a key indicator. We've recommended suspension. Unfortunately, in the drafts that we've seen from the state board, it's not yet there. We're hopeful it will end up there. It's because it's so important, because as it's been indicated, the key indicators will drive the system. Secondly, getting the needed data that will populate the system. School climate surveys are so important. They're in LCFF, they're required on safety and connectedness. Our research shows that there's a 44% increase in districts having goal-related having goals related to them, but still many do not have these goals. So you can look at in the budget by doing something about that to help fund real-time analysis, disaggregated data, subsidizing the surveys as we do now, or legislation to establish a small set of uniform questions to allow for comparability and lessons learned, and Assemblymember Weber has legislation on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, Terry Burns on behalf of the California School Boards Association. And we agree with you. Thank you so much for holding this hearing. It is important. This is a sea change for school districts, for schools, for school board members. We are very much at the early stages. CSBA is working to train board members on how to do community engagement, how to communicate budgets and programs to community members, how to understand their data. Question came up earlier about what's been done with the $13 billion. One of the things that's been done is to get data systems for school districts. Most school districts didn't have the rich data systems that are needed to do all of the things that come forth through LCFF. And you've seen now data systems coming up across districts. So districts are looking and setting baselines that they need to do, that you will be able to see the outcomes for students. It isn't so much about seeing where the dollars went as seeing the outcomes. Are we closing gaps? Are children having better results of their education? So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Sandy Mendoza. I'm an advocacy manager for Families in Schools, and we are also a member of the Equity Coalition, so we do agree very strongly with what Liz Guillen had said earlier, and we concur. You also know that, or in your binder or handouts, you had received this report that we released yesterday. We had interviewed 14 school districts regarding their parent engagement efforts. And the story that comes out of that is basically saying that school administrators do not know how to engage parents effectively. Even though there's progress being made in some schools, it's not enough. It's not consistent. It's not from district to district or school to school in terms of standard practices. And what they're also saying is that they need help. They cannot do it alone. And so in this report, we offer some recommendations, but one key recommendation is that school districts need, and parents have been saying this for a long time, they need professional development. Parents need professional development. More importantly, and as importantly, school administrators, teachers, bus drivers, the staff at the front desk, they need professional development on how to work effectively with parents. And we need this to be based on what the research says, because school districts also don't even know what it looks like. So it's not just a question of how will we know, will it work, how would we know if it works, but how do we know what works? And Dr. Cohen had said earlier about evaluating results, not minutia. We would also say evaluate results based on practices that we know does work. So please take a look at that and help to invest and support that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Ernie Silva from Sciatech. I want to thank you for a really helpful hearing, and I want to do a shout out to Lynn Lorber. This is one of the most comprehensive collections of accountability material that I've ever seen, and so thank you very much. As you know, I work for a network of dropout recovery high schools. I'm really glad that the State Board and the department are beginning to explore meaningful metrics for alternative schools. What I want to suggest is that policymakers need to be very clear about metrics for dropout recovery high schools. They're not the same. Our students, just so you get a context, our students have been out of school when they join us for, on average, 500 days. They are far below grade level. They are 4 to 5 years below grade level, and they are very low-income students. What we need to do is we think through this unique population and the unique pedagogies is to make sure that we're developing metrics that are specific to these kind of schools, because as you heard Wendell from San Diego. I mean, he's got some great programs, but the students are not the same across the board. They're not the same from their alternative schools to our school. And I really hope that you look and think about that as we continue to move forward. Thank you again for a great hearing.
Good afternoon, Marta Alvarez on behalf of the ACSA, the Association of California School Administrators. We are very pleased to see the direction that California is taking with the alignment of the federal and the state accountability system. I think it's very opportune that while the state's developing the system with the local and state school districts, that there's this alignment. Part of that effort is to try to reduce the reporting that has been duplicated over the years. One thing I do want to mention, we think the State Board is on the right direction. It's going in the right path. Part of that, as you mentioned, you heard before from the other speakers, is there's better collaboration at the local level between the administrators, the instructional and curriculum staff, and the financial services staff. That work will help develop better programs at the local level. The other, we think that it's working, is that there's better strategic planning with the school districts happening across the state. At ACSA, we have been trying to develop a peer-to-peer collaborative. It started in September of 2015. And with this effort, it's trying to build capacity at the local level. We think that part of this effort about accountability, it requires buy-in from the local administrators, the local communities, engagement with parents and the communities and school board members and others. And so we look forward to continuing to be part of the discussions. We did a survey from our members last month, trying to get better understanding about the work that they need from the state, the support, the intervention, technical assistance, and we look forward to being part of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Annie Lee, and I'm from the National Center for Youth Law. My comments will focus specifically on LCFF implementation and accountability as it pertains to foster youth students. I'm thankful for the legislature for including foster youth as an unduplicated pupil subgroup under LCFF. It has made the invisible achievement gap that foster youth experience visible. It's focused much needed attention on the unique educational challenges of this population, and in many districts, it's opened the door to new partnerships with child welfare, probation, courts, minors council, advocates, and other foster youth stakeholders. While there's been great movement forward, there's also a long way to go. Foster youth, because of their high rates of school mobility, the lack of a consistent parent figure in their lives, and their histories of trauma, have a distinct set of educational needs that require distinct and differentiated services. Unfortunately, in a review of many LCAPs in the district, we're not seeing goals for foster youth or unique actions and services for foster youth. By way of example, I examined all of the LCAPs in Alameda County, which is a county with many foster youth students, and only Oakland Unified School District listed goals for foster youth students. And again, only Oakland listed unique actions and services meant to address foster youth students and improve their outcomes. Unless continued oversight from this body looks at LCFF implementation as the LCAP gets renewed and modified, we're not going to achieve the promise of LCFF for our foster youth students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Danielle Mollet with the California Alliance of Child and Family Services, representing about 130 nationally accredited and nonprofit providers of foster care services. I'm also speaking about the needs of students in foster care, and one piece that is really critical that we look at is that rubric process and the ability to kind of look at that data and understand how students are performing. As a piece of that, we believe it's very important that we have that data disaggregated and that we are able to look specifically at the data subset of foster youth. A few metrics that we think are particularly applicable to foster youth would be suspension and expulsion rates, as well as chronic absenteeism. And this will really help us understand the true needs of students in foster care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, John Affeld from Public Advocates. We are supportive of the multiple measures accountability system and the direction to try to combine the state and federal systems into one coherent system. We like the direction things are moving in. Want to emphasize 3 points from this morning. One, on the transparency around supplemental and concentration spending. That is a key part of the theory of change of LCFF, is increasing and improving services for these high-need students. The problem is we don't know at the local level well enough how districts are spending and increasing and improving services with that money. It's not being transparently reported in way too many districts in LCAPs, and counties are approving them. And we will be coming out with a report that will highlight some of those problems. At the state level, as was indicated, the state is not tracking the how supplemental and concentration is being used in the aggregate. We have made a couple of attempts through legislation or the budget process, whether it's a SACS code or some alternative system, to gather, collect, report, so you policymakers can know how supplemental concentration funds are being used to increase approved service. You don't know how that $32 billion is being spent, and you ought to. And at every turn, when we get down to a final decision, the administration has resisted publishing and somehow reporting that data. And that is just missing out on a key piece of information that we need to know. Finally, the state board seems to be going in a direction of just including in the accountability system state things for which we have state level data on, which is understandable. That's a practical constraint. But resisting efforts to add and expand what we collect state level data on. LCFF has some new priorities in it that never existed before. No wonder we don't have state level data on parent engagement and some of these school climate measures. No wonder we don't have a school survey that collects state level data. This body ought to move forward with investing in systems that will collect and report parent engagement and some of these school climate measures. We ought to fund, we have a school climate survey, the Healthy Kids. We ought to just fund it for every district. That's decimal dust in our budget. There's no reason that we ought not to do that. We need to be investing, put our money where our mouth is and invest in the state priorities this body's established. Thank you.
Thank you.
Samantha Tran with Children Now. Good afternoon. We wanted to echo a lot of the comments that were made on the panel and amongst the speakers that we have this real opportunity in California to create a coherent state, federal, local accountability system. And we think it's really critical that the legislature engage this year because we're talking about the timeline where we have a plan by next January. And so there are some specific areas where the legislature can provide some of that coherence, both through statute and appropriations. Specifically, we need to make some decisions about what measures are used for state accountability purposes and how we effectively and appropriately integrate some of those local measures as well, and that they're valued in the system. That we have the data conversation, as many of us have talked about, and think about a dashboard that's actually going to be useful for all the stakeholders involved, educators, parents, the broader public. I also want to echo the sentiments that my partners in the foster youth community lifted up, that there's some real technical issues that we need to address there on the data side and the subgroup side, and that we think about our investments in the support, collaboration, and intervention infrastructure. We have some one-time monies that have been dedicated for that purpose, but we need to think about the ongoing roles and responsibilities and where we're going to put those resources. So there's a real critical time for the legislature to engage this year to help define that as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Martha Zaragoza Diaz, and I am representing California Association for Bilingual Education and Californians Together, and we advocate on behalf of English learners. I would like to concur with the statements and recommendations made by Ms. Liz Guillen. We agree with all of the recommendations that she made. In addition, we have findings and recommendations contained in 2 of our reports. The first year you have in front of you, and the second report will be released shortly in April. We looked at 29 district LCAPs with high numbers and high concentration of English learners through the lens of English learners. And while the first year we found many weaknesses and gaps, in the second year, evaluating the same LCAPs by the same districts, there were some improvements, but there were still many weaknesses and gaps that still need to be addressed. Our overall recommendation is that when providing technical assistance or support to districts, CDE, CCEE, and the county offices of education, in order to ensure that LCAPs do address the educational needs, instructional needs of English learners and other student subgroups, that they make sure that it's done in a coherent manner. It was very difficult to be able to connect the dots between programs and services with one another and how they would lead to improved academic performance and growth. Second recommendation is that greater transparency with regards to capacity building of teachers instructing English learners, including identifying funds used for professional development and for collaboration activities. Also, greater transparency with regards to parent engagement of non-English speaking parents. While it did improve, it was difficult to ascertain whether these parent recommendations were indeed included in the LCAPs. Lastly, we saw very little implementation of ELD standards, both designated and integrated, as called for in the ELA-ELD curriculum framework included in the LCAPs. So we were very concerned about that in light of the fact that English learner proficiency is one of the expectations of ESSA as well as state priority. In conclusion, we believe that we are headed in the right direction, and we thank the State Board of Education and the California Department of Education with all of the work that
they have done in regards to the evaluation rubrics, but we are still very concerned that equity may still get lost in the overall new accountability system. In guidance, resources, and through leadership opportunities, the state must reaffirm the equity intents of the LCFF and echo this in the development of the state's accountability and continuous learning system that will be tied to the LCAP process. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Tracy Weinstein on behalf of Students First. I just want to thank you for holding this hearing. I think this is such a critical issue. As a student who went through California's public schools in the height of NCLB, went on to study state accountability systems, and now is advocating on behalf of parents and families in California who rely on the information that those systems provide to advocate for their own families. I think this is a critical issue, and we're really excited about the conversation here. Just want to reiterate the need to really keep a focus on schools, not just LEAs within this accountability system. Much of the foundation is going to be built off our LCAPS evaluation rubrics, all that have had a focus on LEAs, but again, the importance of making sure we're tracking dollars at the school level, tracking outcomes at the school level, and also just want to reiterate what a lot of folks have said here today about equity and making sure that as the state board considers the different indicators that it will be using, making sure that there is a focus not just on reporting for subgroups and overall achievement and growth, but how are schools really closing gaps for kids that historically have been ignored. And then also making sure that throughout all of this, we don't lose sight of the fact that we need to make sure that the information provided through these systems is actionable and accessible for families. And we think what the core districts reported on in terms of indexing, whether through an overall measure or within different indicators, we think that's really critical because parents and families need to know how their schools are comparing to others in their community so that they can make the best choices on behalf of their families. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Leangela Reed on behalf of the Small School Districts Association. I just want to thank you for the hearing and for the opportunity for the legislature to hear about a lot of the good things that are going on, about the programs that are being built within counties and at school level and district level, the engagements that's occurring, the self-reflection that's occurring through this process. It's difficult to take a leap of faith on a new program and a new process, but we are seeing examples, and you heard them today, of things that are working. And you've heard a lot of concerns about parent engagement, but the fact is you also received a lot of examples of where parent engagement is thriving and growing. It's a bit like when you have a young child that's learning how to walk. It's really hard not to help them to walk because we don't want them to fall. But the fact is they never learn to walk alone if we interfere too much. And we just ask that we are very pleased with the direction this is going. It's going to be a large process, but folks are engaged and it's developing as it goes. And we look to work with the legislature to continue that, and let's see what this looks like and see if it's actually working, because we're hearing at the local level it is. And we're hearing from parents and students as well as teachers and administrators, a satisfaction with the process, if not always the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for participating and being patient with us. We do need to be more persistent and have more conversation about what is going on with our investment in our students. So with that, we're going to close the Senate Education Committee, and we'll see you on the 9th of March. We'll begin hearing bills. Thank you very much.